Why riots do not work. Those who call for riots and demonstrations have little knowledge of history and less of the situation. Civilization was not constructed on the backs of rioters. Nor did revolutions advance technology. These ploys are to divert us from the real problem and the real war. Ephesians 6:11-13 Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. We are to put on the whole armor of God because we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and power. But what do riots and revolutions do? They contrast one force against another. But the actual structure of the society does not change. Those who call for revolutions often forget Russia, China, Mexico, America, France, England, and many other nations had revolutions. The world looks like it does as a consequence of all of the riots and revolutions we have had. The world struggles between left and right, and the struggles are getting ever more serious and the consequences of the other side winning seem ever more significant. But what if Trump, Maloney and others on the far right win the elections? Even if they win and do all they propose to do, what guarantee is there the next elections will not give power to the radical left? Each election cycle leaves nations deeper in debt and more compromised. Even with the best of intentions, a conservative government can reverse the left's agenda only so far. No matter how far it is right or how libertarian, no government can eliminate government. And that is the weakness of this system. Christians need to work outside the system. The job we have is to combat these principalities and powers because they are evil masquerading as good and many they lead into the pit. We combat evil by reversing what evil does. The details are irrelevant. What matters is if we are responding as an adult, or as a child. When we put away childish things, we need to put away childish responses to unsavory conditions. What this means, we take responsibility for our actions. Service but paying the cost of what we do. Many people get stuck with much higher bills because they do not wish to confront the lesser cost. For example, if a person you like tempts you to do evil, what is your response? You may not wish to deal with the situation for whatever reason. But then what is the cost if you do not deal with the situation as it emerges? If we do not act as adults, the world will impose costs on us of their choosing. Riots and revolutions are one way of doing things. But how much can they change things? The rioters have leaders, and they have followers. If they succeed, the leaders become the government and the followers a new favored class. But the underlying problems remain the same. We must assume that the Bible got it right with this, as with everything else. The basic division biblically is between good and evil, the flesh and the spirit. But there is another way of looking at this division that is more relevant. There are the spiritually mature and the spiritually immature. Most Christians assume this only applies to Christians, whereas the major division is between the saved and unsaved. This might be a reasonable interpretation if all those professing Christ were saved and all those who do not profess faith are not saved. This is not biblically substantiable. Not only are there many who profess Christ who Christ does not know, not only is it questioned whether when Christ returns, he will find faith on earth, but even those who do not know Christ but who do the things of Christ, will be saved. Romans 2:12-16 For as many as have sinned without law shall also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another, in the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. There are other verses we could reference. It is said God picked from the beginning those who would be saved. Which means humanity has no role at all to play in his salvation and damnation. However, we are also told that what the church binds on earth will be bound in heaven. If those saved were saved at the beginning of time, what have professions of faith and church membership got to do with it? But if we look at the spiritually mature as forming the church and the spiritually immature as the ones not saved, we can reconcile many supposed discrepancies. The spiritually immature contain all those who are not saved, whether these are nominal Christians or atheists or some other category. The spiritually mature and the Christians who form the church. But there is a church that has been formed of the spiritually immature. To differentiate one from the other only requires some common sense logic. If the spiritually mature form the church, they must add value to what exists. The church has to be formed something, and if we already know it is not buildings of bodies and pews, there is not much left that it can be. The church is the spiritually mature. But what marks or defines a person's maturity? What divides the mature from the immature? Biologically, we grow naturally. Spiritual maturity comes by design. The immature are immature because they are not ready for maturity. The immature live on milk, not meat, because they do not want the less digestible food. This suggests the immature are dependents because they cannot accept the responsibilities of maturity. The immature cannot or will not support themselves. A riot is a response by the immature to emotional trauma. But the riot only wants to restore a previous level of care. People will protest a lack of care, but to move to the riot stage, an existential threat needs to be present. A riot occurs when a parasite feels its host is about to inoculate itself against the infection. This tells us that those who riot are not rioting to have benefits removed. They are enraged by spiritually mature people who want to reduce the impact that the spiritually immature are having. The problem is, the spiritually mature are often sympathetic to the plight of the spiritually immature. Even though the immature are fighting to exploit the sympathies of the mature. But all too often the mature see the parasite as a victiport. We look at them as the Good Samaritan looked at the man beaten and robbed. But the homeless drug addict is often the author of his own misfortune. Therefore, when the spiritually immature riot over a perceived loss of benefits, the worst thing the mature can do is join in with them. This is not charity, it is enabling the parasite to infect his host, and all too often the host is the church. Charity does not create dependency. Charity is giving the other person the benefit of the doubt. It does not require we shut down our ability to think rationally. We do not need to eliminate our instinct for survival. We cannot defeat logic, or the way the world is designed. We were made to be of use, to the creation of the church. This is not a thing. It is the cumulative value added to the world by work. The church is a market. Markets are composed of businesses, but businesses are a type of activity that consists of workers exchanging the products of their labor. There is no state nor parasites in a market. Anything more than workers in their own businesses is an addition. Riots do not create markets. They create socialism. People do not riot to create markets, because markets cannot be created by a riot. Riots only produce socialism. Riots are caused by people looking for a way to access a market's goods and services. Those who engage in riots want power, because power is the ability to gain control over the wealth created by others. The church ought to avoid riots and even create the conditions in which they cannot happen. In other words, the church ought to create a market, or apologetics market, that eliminates all freeloading and parasites. This is actually the only way to build the church, because the church is a market containing Christian businesses. Riots do not build the church, they do not build markets, and so by any reasonable definition, do not work.